Welcome back to all our attendees. I'm pleased to announce our next speaker, Mr. Magdi Amin, Senior Advisor at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. Speaking on today's topic is Sudan's Family Support Program, Sparking a Fintech Revolution. Over to you, Mr. Magdi.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction, Edwin, and thank you for everybody who's joined. I'm going to try to make 3 points today. First, that the Sudanese economy actually needs this fintech revolution. Second, that the policy environment is being created for that. And third, that fintech is actually a very viable investment opportunity in Sudan today. Point one, why do we need a fintech revolution? Well, as you know, for those who follow Sudan, the transitional government that I joined inherited an economy that was mired in a deep economic and social financial crisis, isolation, secession of South Sudan, floods, COVID-19, refugees from the neighbors that are coming in the thousands. The revolution in 2018 was led by women and youth who demanded a decisive break from the past isolation, and the signing of the peace agreement last year, the removal of Sudan from this list of state sponsors of terror, the improvements in freedom and human rights were all signs of hope that we can start to meet the aspirations of those that took part of that revolution. But no sustainable transition can take place without fixing and addressing those deep economic challenges that we inherited. So a year ago, we started a very bold economic reform program that sought to correct the distortions, including the budget deficit, years of declining growth, trade deficit, currency in free fall, and gaps in economic governance. And we knew that deep and painful reforms were the only option, and that they would be in the short run very difficult on the population before results started to show. But that was the only real way to build the foundation for future growth. But those reforms really hit the citizens, especially the middle class and the poor. So what we've decided to do is launch the Sudan Family Support Program, which is a large cash transfer designed to cover 6.5 million families, about 80% of the population. We'll immediately face challenges. Because of isolation and instability, the policy institutional gaps, the financial sector, as Dr. Taha said, has deteriorated. And while there are a lot of banks, around 38 banks, the sector as a whole is small. Credit to the private sector as a share of GDP is only around 15%, which is very low relative to other countries, a similar level of development, and even low relative to other peers within Africa. And the total assets of the financial sector also is very low relative to all country classifications, low income, etc. The financial inclusion is low. Only 15% of Sudanese have a bank account, as measured in the last Fintech report, compared to around 22% for low-income countries, and 34% on average in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is even lower for Sudanese women, and I know Camilo later on will talk about economically engaging and empowering women in Sudan. So these basic facts, many of you will recognize, that create the basic ingredients for leapfrogging that we saw all across Africa, using digital technology and mobile money. And fortunately in Sudan, two of the basic foundational pieces are there. Around 80% of Sudanese have mobile phones. Around 80% of Sudanese, around 34 million people, have a national ID. So with these two pillars, connectivity and identification, you can start to create a digital platform, both for the family support program, but also for digital payments. So the family support program launched February 24th, 3 days after the currency reform, which was part of our reform program. By now, we were we're getting close to 6 months in. Over 2 million families have enrolled, representing over 8 million Sudanese. We're about 1/3 of our target for enrollment. But now we start to face a new challenge, which is the payment system. Only about 530,000 families that have enrolled have received their cash transfers so far. And we've discovered that the payment ecosystem has a lot of gaps. To close the gap, we need more mobile money, but we need really the whole ecosystem. The MNOs need to participate. Most of the families enrolling in the program have opted for mobile money. But beyond mobile money, we need broader ATM networks, ACH and other networks for cash transfer, POS networks, agent networks. So there is really not liquidity management and others. So there's really not just banks or even MNOs that need to be strengthened, but the entire ecosystem. So let me go forward. And so the second point is that the policy environment for this is being strengthened and developed. The Central Bank of Sudan has introduced a new business model, which is more decentralized. It allows MNOs and fintechs to come into the central bank and obtain a license to provide financial services that is still regulated, but not a bank. Before, it was very closely related to the banks. Now this is opened up a bit, and that will help drive the transformation. Secondly, we can't, and I would not advise that we should introduce the data economy without rules to ensure that data is used safely. Data, as you all know, can be a dual-edged sword. It can be used to empower people. It can be used to empower institutions, or even control, suppress, or manipulate people by targeting and fake media, etc. So the data economy needs governance, and under the guidance of the minister who spoke earlier, we are in fact redeveloping and developing new laws on data protection and privacy. This is really important because of all of our services in fintech, whether you're talking about payments, things like cash transfer, but all of that depends on the trust of citizens. And the trust is first and foremost in order to get the kind of economy that's broad-based. Number 4, we are, as Dr. Taha said, moving into the process of reforming the banking system. Introduced conventional banking, but also because of the long history, the difficult history we're now working our way out of, a lot of the banks need a recapitalization. So I think a number of the banks will be open to potential partnerships in order to expand and to upgrade themselves technologically, leveraging. So I actually see partnerships between fintechs and banks being as an important part of the future transformation. As many of you recognize around the world, it's not about banks versus MNOs versus fintechs, but really creative partnerships may include acquisitions as well to create that ecosystem. And Sudan doesn't necessarily need 38 banks, of which maybe 5 or 6 are large, and many of them are small. We probably need fewer larger banks, and many of them much more technologically savvy. So I would watch that space. And my third point is that this creates a viable investment opportunity. And my core function as an advisor to the Ministry of Finance is to support the economic reform process. And by introducing the family support program, the idea is to help people cope until markets recover and jobs start getting created by the private sector. It will take a bit of time. So during this transition, people are going to need some help. But I actually think we are really talking about an investment opportunity. The African fintech market has been accelerating. Startups securing about $330 million of funding only in the first half of 2021. This is everybody, I'm sure, in this conference knows about this opportunity. But really, there are not too many countries left where the greenfield opportunity for fintech is so clear. The gap between mobile penetration and banking penetration, that big gap where you got 15% of people with banks, but 80% of people with phones, that's rare. That's not too many countries have that sort of nice opportunity. That's a problem for us as you know, if we where we want to be. But in order to get to where we want to be, people need to invest into that space, and that's a very viable opportunity. You know, the family support program, by enrolling 6.5 million families, you know, over 5 million of those families will have accounts for the first time, new digital wallets. The program itself offers fees, 3.5%. So if families go to cash out their transfer, the agents will have an incentive, or in some cases, it'll be the banks. And that's a foundation for a payment ecosystem, not only for this program, but all future transfers, targeted subsidies. The only question is whether the private sector will see this opportunity and take advantage. Visa has recognized this and decided to open an office and started to make some connections, and recently launched in Sudan with UCB and others. So we all know this is a transition and there are risks. The private sector looks at a situation like Sudan and think, well, maybe I'll wait to see what happens. But from a risk standpoint, also just take a look at what's happened only in the last year and a half. So the Juba peace agreement, leading to comprehensive peace, eventually getting all of the parties on board, dramatically lowers the risk of conflict, which has been one of the main issues in the past. Secondly, the currency unification has mitigated currency risk. We started that process. The pound was about 378, and it's now around 440, 450. So it's moved slightly, but basically it's stable. It's been pretty stable since this launch. The subsidy reform that we did is helping to close the deficit, to eventually start to translate into lower inflation figures. There's currently, the markets are still adjusting to a lot of imported costs that are higher. There's a new anti-corruption law and a commission mitigating risks of corruption. And the HIPC process, the debt restructuring, basically we're really lowering country credit risk. Sudan had a massive 60 billion plus external debt, which was unpayable, and much of which was already in arrears. We've already removed arrears to the major multilaterals. There's a $2 billion World Bank program, grant program to Sudan. We agreed with the Paris Club last month on 14 billion of interim debt relief, and then in a few years, much more of it will be relieved. So basically, we're reducing the drivers of risk, both politically and economically, so that the opportunities actually become viable and investable. So let me sum up. Sudan is embarking on a once-in-a-generation opportunity to address decades of mismanagement, isolation, deterioration, and there can be no realization of the goals of the revolution, freedom, peace, and justice, without economic freedom, without resources to address the economic disparities, without an economy that gives everyone a fair opportunity, irrespective of ethnicity, geography, or gender. Financial inclusion is a key part of that. You can't create a fair, level playing field for everyone if only a few people have access to finance. So I'm asking you as fintech players to be part of this revolution, a fintech revolution designed to democratize access to finance and to create the broad-based economy Sudanese deserve. And I look forward to working with you all on that journey. Many thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Magdi, for your presentation. It was to the point and very informative, resourceful. A few questions for you, Mr. Magdi, is a lot of Sudanese are also outside Sudan, correct? So the family support part, does it apply to the people who are outside Sudan as well, the Sudanese who are outside Sudan?
Well, there's one basic criteria, and that one criteria is that you have to be Sudanese and have a national ID. However, if the addresses of people who are applying are overseas. There are Sudanese with national IDs who are not within the borders. They will not be targeted for this program. No, it's for Sudanese in Sudan. In fact, a lot of the Sudanese outside of Sudan are sending money back, and that's another area. Remittances and others where more fintech investment could be quite helpful. There's a large amount of money that gets transferred in. But no, the family support program, people come and enroll. They enter their IDs. If they have several family members, each of their IDs is entered. We do the validation, and then we also are sort of checking addresses. Basically, those addresses are already in the system once they got their national ID. So it's not targeting non-citizens, and it's not targeting citizens outside of Sudan.
Okay. So, Mr. Magdi, we hope to meet you in Sudan next year in person.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much for your time and your presentation. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.